So, well, hello, Oregon. All right, you're ready. Welcome to this morning's event. It's going to be action-packed, fun, and going to get us going for a great conference. So I'm Denny Doyle, Mayor of the City of Beaverton, also the President, Steve. Also the honor to be the President of the Oregon League of Cities for this year. And so I'd like to officially welcome you to the League's 92nd annual conference here in the beautiful city of Portland, despite the rain, Ted. Okay, I'd like to now introduce the color guard from Beaverton, Oregon. Will the color guard present the colors for us? And again, it's our own police department from the city of Beaverton. Would you all please stand? Now it's my honor to introduce the national anthem. It's going to be sung by the Beaverton High School Advanced Vocal Ensemble.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free, and the home of the brave, home of the brave.
Thank you. Thank you, Beaverton High School Advanced Vocal Ensemble. All right, as we're about ready to begin the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. You may be seated. Now I'd like to introduce Wajid Sayad for our invocation. Wajid, please.
Good morning, everybody. I greet you with the greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. My name is Wajdi Saeed. I'm a native of Yemen, and I have been here for almost 30 years. I choose to become an American because of what we have just pledged, for justice for all. It is very important for us, of people, in front of God, to love and respect one another. The Quran teaches me every day, and I'm going to recite the opening chapter of the Quran in Arabic. Why I'm going to recite it in Arabic? Because as a nation, we are a multiracial, a multi-ethnic, and multi-religious society. We have to celebrate our togetherness and understand each other, and then I'll do the translation. The opening chapter says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. All praises are due to God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. When we seek help from you. And when we need help from you. Show us the straight path, the path of those whom you blessed, and not that went astray. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received this chapter of the Quran that we recite 17 times every day in our 5 daily prayers, he says, O God, you are the peace and the source of all peace. To you belong all the gratitude and all the praises. O God, help us become more understanding and more accepting of one another. Help us build bridges of peace and compassion. Help us overcome our egos and our stereotypes. Bring us out of the darkness of ignorance and hate into the light of harmony and peace. Help us unite to realize our common destiny as one humanity and become your hands on earth. Help us to be grateful for your immense blessings, for our beautiful, diverse humanity. Help us see our differences as strength. Please unite our hearts and help us to be one. Oh God, please bless our parents and children. Oh God, bless this nation and bless our humanity at large with the healing and unifying hearts. Amen. So the great Arab American Gibran Khalil Gibran, a native of Syria or the greater Syria, nowadays it's called Lebanon as well. He said from New York, where he resided and lived, to our mayors and to our administrators. In his famous poem, he says that, let there be spaces in our togetherness today, and let the winds of the heaven dance between you and between all of us. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls, our souls. Fill each other cup, but drink not from one other cup. Give one another of your bread, of our bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous. But let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not into each other. Dear respected mayors, dear respected city managers and employees of our great Oregon, it is very important that we rise to the challenge, irrespective of our liberalism or conservatism, of our Republican being a Republican or independence. The world is watching us as a nation. We have made it so far to become a great nation. Let it be in words and practices, and let us unite again and again and again. The Prophet Muhammad, when he recited that peace, there were Christian Arabs there were Jewish Arabs, there were Muslim Arabs, and there were agnostic and polytheist Arab. Muslim civilization was one of the best civilizations that history remember. When it was the golden age, it was dark in Europe. But Muslim scientists have really evolved to become the embodiment of the European Renaissance. Let us remember that this great state was served by a great Arab American, Victor Atiyah. He was a Republican, but he was a good Republican. Let us remember, let us remember that the great Arab American that was the greatest urban planner in this city, the founding dean of the College of Urban Planning, was the late Nuhat Tolan. Let us remember Governor Atiyah as an Arab American. Let us remember Nuhat Tolan as an Arab American. Let us love one another and respect one another. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I just want to run a disclaimer that Mayor Doyle is my good mayor. I campaigned for him, but I elected, because I live in Portland, I elected Mayor Cook. And then my mind with Mayor Cook, because our center is in Tigard. And then Callaway is another great mayor for me too as well. I love you, each one of you, equally, by the way.
All right. Yes, and well, you've done a great job getting the Muslim Educational Trust up and going. It's a beautiful facility, and it's more important if there are beautiful people there from all over. So thank you very much for sharing some time this morning. Okay, I'd like to take this moment to begin to introduce our mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler. Ted and I have been friends for a long, long time. He's mayor of the jewel of our state of Oregon. He's part of this region, it's part of the state that is setting, in my eyes, a beacon for the rest of the country of how to be a state for everybody and all the folks who live here, who come here. And Ted, I would like to bring you up. I know you're on a tight schedule. The mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler.
Thank you, Denny, and thank you, Wajdi, for those profound and timely words. A bit of housekeeping in the spirit of Wajdi's comments. I do believe that it is important for all of us to work together, to share and to explore our differences. And I'm inspired by that, Wajdi. And so in that spirit, I noticed that there is a King Cab Ford 350 out in front of the hotel that says Letterbuck on the side. I want you to know that I am borrowing that. But if that's your vehicle, do not worry. I am leaving my vehicle. It is an electric Ford Fiesta. And it has an I heart Portlandia bumper sticker on the back. I'm sure we'll have interesting mutual experiences, and then we can meet back here in a week and see who lived. So, as mayor, it's my honor and privilege to join with Denny and Wajdi and all of you to welcome you to the city of Portland. Thank you to the League of Oregon Cities for the tremendous amount of work and effort that goes into planning and executing this fantastic event. Portland is honored to host the 92nd annual LOC conference. This conference, of course, acts as an important opportunity for all of us as leaders from across this state to exchange ideas and best practices and to build a common understanding around the issues that impact all of Oregon communities, big or small. As city leaders, we're responsible for providing the essential services and for caring for our residents through safe and livable neighborhoods, affordable housing, well-maintained infrastructure, a strong workforce, and growing economic opportunities, to name just a few of the items that are on our collective plates. And as you know, with every single year, new items get added to that plate, and complexity develops around the issues that are already on the plate. So we have much to discuss and much to learn from each other. You're going to find that this conference offers fantastic panels and fantastic tours into many of the topics that I mentioned and some that I didn't. Thanks to all of you who are giving your time and your energy and your expertise as panelists and guides during these panel discussions and during these tours. The League of Oregon Cities Conference is also a great opportunity for city leaders to connect and strengthen relationships, both here at the Doubletree Hotel as well as exploring around Portland. And I do hope you take that opportunity to explore. I hope you'll take the time to enjoy many of the great amenities our city has to offer while you're here. World-class food and drink, shops full of locally made goods, diverse outdoor recreational opportunities, and excellent public transit wherever you want to go. And whereas we might ordinarily be complaining about the fact that it is raining, I think this is the first time in recent Oregon history where people are dancing in the streets. So enjoy the rain while it's here. Thank you all for coming to the City of Roses, and I certainly look forward to all that we're going to learn. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the incredible work that each of you do in your respective cities. I know the people of this state appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Ted, and enjoy the rest of your calm day. So I'd like to take a moment before we continue the activities to acknowledge the very, very generous support we have received from our conference sponsors. This year, we have reached a record level of support for this event, as 47 organizations have stepped forward as financial sponsors. I'm proud to say that this year's conference has the highest level of sponsorship in 92 years. So that's pretty darn good, don't you think? So I'd like to note this morning's opening ceremonies are being sponsored by City County Insurance Services, as we lovingly know them as CIS, the law firm of Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, Inhabit, Portland General Electric, FFA Architecture and Interiors, and Plan B Consultancy. Throughout the conference, you'll see attendees wearing light blue ribbons on their badges. These are letting you know these are our sponsors. Please take a moment, even a brief moment, to say thank you for them for their generous support. Without their involvement and support, we would not be able to bring you the quality of speakers and the educational opportunities just to you right here that we have planned throughout the next day and a half. So, please, another round of applause for all of our sponsors for the 2017 concert. Okay. Before I ask Craig to come up, I'd like to kick off this year's conference by briefly taking this opportunity to remind ourselves of why the League of Oregon Cities is such an outstanding organization. Simply put, we are stronger together than we are as separate and siloed cities. We need to continue to work together in ways that the founders of our organization envisioned, uniting our cities over common issues and demonstrating our strength in that unity. I spent the last year having a blast as your president, traveling this great state of ours. Is Ontario here? There we go. Is Hermiston in the house? All right. I know the answer, but is Redmond, Oregon in the house? How about Central Point? All right. I could go on and on. Litterbuck. The best of Oregon. No, that's Beaverton. I'm sorry. It was great to travel throughout our beautiful state and see you all firsthand in action, volunteering to help make the cities you love so much, they're inspired to their local visions and aspirations. It's truly been a joy, uplifting for me, knowing that this is going on all over the state. It's not in any one spot, any one region. Just as proud as you are with your cities in rural Oregon, I hope you enjoyed seeing a bit the same pride in our great metro cities, and hopefully you'll see more during the tours yesterday and your adventures on your own time today. Portland, Troutdale, Tigard are each great cities in their own right, seeking to bring their residents' aspirations to life. It doesn't matter, urban, rural, small, large, we stand as one at the League of Cities, and we are equally proud of each other's work. So I think we should thank each other for all that we do across the state. All right, you can't have an opening speech without some statistics. This conference really illustrates what Oregon's all about. This weekend, we have nearly 500 elected officials attending, 500, and over 130 cities represented. 47 out of our 50 largest cities are here. Think about that. So let's give ourselves another round of applause for such a strong showing this year. All right, Mr. Craig, are you ready to come up to the stage and wow us? Our Acting Secretary, Craig Honeyman, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Doyle. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Craig Honeyman, and I'm humbled and honored to serve as your interim executive director and to welcome you on behalf of the League of Oregon Cities staff to the 92nd Annual League of Oregon Cities Conference, the largest gathering of city officials ever to take place. Ever. Huge. Huge. Well, maybe not. But let's take a look at some demographics by the numbers, some real numbers. Among us today are 447 city officials representing 133 cities. 92% of the population of the state of Oregon that live in cities are represented in this audience today. 64 small cities, defined as being cities of 5,000 or less, and 3 cities with less than 500 population. Huntington, Maupin, and Nehalem are with us this week. And we should acknowledge cities that have traveled the furthest. 8 cities who have come 300 miles or more to be at the LOC conference as represented on the map. Baker City, Brookings, Enterprise, Joseph, Lakeview, Ontario, Vail, and at 388 miles, the city of Nissa. How about a round of applause for all of them? I also want to acknowledge the 10 cities who have representatives here who are beneficiaries of the LOC Foundation Scholarship Programs. Representatives from the cities of Amity, Almsville, Cave Junction, Chiloquin, Halsey, Huntington, Joseph, Manzanita, Port Orford, and Sherwood. This is a great program. If you want to know more about it, please stop by the LOC, the Ask LOC booth on the floor of the trade show, and we'll be happy to tell you more about it so you can avail yourself of that opportunity in future sessions, future conferences. So at this point, I want to do some housekeeping and give you some more information about the remainder of the program. I want to call your attention specifically to the Ask LOC booth. In the program book, you'll find specific times where your intergovernmental relations staff and your legal research staff will be available to answer any specific questions that you may have. As Mayor Doyle indicated, be sure as you're walking through the trade show to thank our sponsors and our exhibitors. They're the people who underwrite this conference largely and make it happen. We have state agency directors here, as always, as well as representatives from several congressional offices. So take advantage of the opportunity to stop by and visit them, ask questions of them as they relate to issues of state importance or federal importance that are confronting you and your cities. Tonight's award dinner, don't miss it. There are still tickets available to dinner tonight. It starts at 6:45 here at the DoubleTree Hotel. If you haven't registered yet, please visit the registration desk at the trade show and get your ticket for this event. It's a great way to honor excellence of your member cities. Tomorrow morning is the is the membership meeting. A reminder that for you to be on time, breakfast will start promptly at 8 o'clock, and the voting and membership meeting will start at 8:20. We don't want you to miss your opportunity to vote, so please be there by 8:20. We'll be voting on board officers and directors. However, there will be no bylaw amendments considered this year. If you don't know who your voting delegate is for your city, please stop by the ASCO LLC booth to find out. I want to take this opportunity again to thank Mayor Wheeler and all of the mayors in the Portland metropolitan area for being such fine hosts and extending such great hospitality to us. Finally, if you have any questions during the course of the remainder of the conference, please seek out League staff. We're all wearing these blue badges, and we'll try to answer any questions you might have. That's it from me. I'll turn the podium back to President Doyle. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. And I want to thank, while we're all here in the same room, I want to thank the League of Cities staff. They're incredible. They have put together a conference that's flowing and very informative. So if we could, those are staff members, could you wave that are in the room here? All right. Thank you so much for what you do. And if I behave, that won't be the last time we all say thank you. So let's move on with the program. If they are telling you it can't be done, prove them wrong. That is the message from our keynote speaker, Major Mary Jennings, MJ Hegar. She is a hero twice over, a Purple Heart decorated pilot, and the soldier who challenged discrimination in the military by ensuring that their policies accurately reflected the reality of today's battlefield. MJ will discuss the importance of teamwork and individual advocacy, hopefully inspiring us to embody the change that we all seek for where we live and where our state is and where our country is. Her exceptional grit shows that fighting for what you believe in enemy territory and beyond, is always worthwhile. And now, please join me in welcoming this morning's keynote speaker, Major MJ Hegar.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Take care. Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. I love Oregon. It's one of my favorite states. I'm from Texas. It's another great state, but boy, Oregon is just beautiful. I was promised some Pendleton whiskey. I guess I'll have to catch that on my way out. Wine is one of my favorite things about Oregon. And then when I got on the conference call to talk about, tell me a little bit about the conference, a little feel for the people, one of the first things mentioned was that pot was legal here. And I'm sensing a trend. And I'm thinking, I'm here in Oregon and we're going to party. So this is very exciting for me. Thank you for coming to this conference. It's so important for professional development, but also for coming and gathering together and listening to ideas and diversity of thought and bringing those thoughts back to your cities. I think this is amazing that you guys put this together and do this. And thank you for letting me be a part of it. And I think that one of the things, hopefully, I'm able to help you with today is the sense that when you hear things like our invocation and you hear people say things that move you, it's moving and you're optimistic, but at the same time, you tend to go home, or most people, me included, tend to go home and just kind of, you're a little overwhelmed by the ideas presented, and you kind of think, well, what could I do, though, in my position, or what could I do? I'm just one person. And I'm here to talk to you today about what I've done as one person, and hopefully inspire you to look inside and say, is there something more I can do toward these ideals, toward these utopian, theories that some people don't believe really could happen, but I do believe that those things could happen. So I want to talk to you today a little bit about how to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds and how to accomplish great things and really apply yourself. You don't have to be the person on the cover of Time magazine to be doing those things, but you can be the change agent. You can be the lighter that lights the fuse, that explodes the bomb of, well, maybe that's a bad analogy. You can be the impetus to that, though. And I'm going to tell you that through just telling you my personal story instead of lecturing to you today. So I grew up in Texas. I bleed burnt orange. I'm a Longhorn True Blue fan. It's a little hard to admit that these days. I wanted to serve my country, but I was also an adrenaline junkie. I wanted to be Han Solo, dodging the asteroids in my Millennium Falcon. So I wanted to be a pilot. And I set out to do that, and it was an incredibly difficult task. And I was told along the way that it was an impossible thing and that I should have a plan B. And I never really was a big fan of plan Bs. I applied to UT. That was the only school I applied to. And my mom objected. I said, well, for me, I don't know if you guys have Dairy Queen here, but for me, it's UT or DQ. It's going to be one of those two. And she was like, okay. And then, I fought to be a pilot for so long. And for 5 years, the Air Force was telling me no. I had a knee injury that I needed surgery for. I faced discrimination. There were a lot of things that happened. And I did become a pilot. And later, I was being interviewed by a reporter who asked me, how did I push through all the failure? And I actually had to stop and ask them what they meant. Because I never thought of those things as failure. They were just, oh, it's going to take me another year. I'm going to have to work hard and be the top of my base and the top of the wing again to apply and be competitive. And what else can I do to be more competitive? And I think that attitude is something that everybody should make part of their daily mantra, is the things that if you're failing in one area and you move to another, that's a data point. You know more now than you did the day before, and you know that that's not going to work, so I'm going to try this. And it's not failure, it's trial and error. And, when I became a pilot, I did 3 tours in Afghanistan. And I was a combat search and rescue helicopter pilot. And on our 3rd tour in Afghanistan on July 29th, 2009, we launched to rescue 3 urgent American casualties, which was relatively rare, actually, because during that time we were doing mostly civilians and Afghan National Army, Afghan National Police. And so we were all business. We were in it to win it. We were going to get these guys out and get them to care before they expired, and there was nothing else that was going to happen that day. We were determined. We had a couple of Army Kiowa helicopters with us. And actually, before I say that, let me just mention one thing. Before you can go into combat, you have to go through survival, evasion, resistance, escape training. And it's called SEER. It's incredibly difficult and stressful, and there aren't double standards. When I was fighting for opening jobs for women in the military, we talked a lot about standards. There weren't 2 standards. There wasn't a standard like a hill for the men and a hill for the women, or a pack for the men and a pack for the women. And I want to show you a picture of how we become experts in camouflage. And it can be difficult to pick me out. So to help you try to find me, look for eyeballs. That's the only thing that you can't put camouflage on. So let's see if you can find me. Does anyone see me? Yep, that's me. I'm the short one on the left. And you can see the guy on the right, he was my evasion partner. We paired up and tried to evade the enemy. And we're carrying the same pack. And that pack looks a lot bigger on me than it does on him. But that was key. That was really important to the story I'm about to tell you, to how I was treated when the stuff hit the fan in Afghanistan. So this is the crew. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to put this video in. This is such a great video, and I just got permission to start using it. When I was fighting for opening jobs for women, a lot of people said things to me like, well, you're a pilot. You don't really understand what it means to be in combat. So I just want to show you what it's like to be a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan. So this is a trigger warning for anybody who actually has combat service, because there's some noise, there's some helicopter noise, there's some gunfire noise. So if that kind of thing disturbs you, I would ask that you look away. We're not going to play it very loud either. The other thing I want to mention before I play the video is please be thinking of questions. We're going to do a very robust Q&A at the end, and with this presentation that I give, the Q&A is always the best part. It's always the part people learn from the most. So please start thinking of your questions. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is offensive. I talk about very sensitive topics: sexual assault, PTSD, discrimination, whether or not women can meet the standard. Those things don't offend me. We have to talk about them as a country. That's why I do this. Public speaking is one of my greatest fears, but I do this so that we can talk about those things. Helicopter pilots in Afghanistan do definitely understand combat. And the story that I'm going to tell you will help you understand how I can speak with credibility to ground combat specifically. So, taking you back to the story, we took off from Kandahar. When we got there, there were these two Kiowa helicopters. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's like a two-seater, very small helicopter with a giant rocket pod, giant machine gun, and an observation pod on the top. So tiny helicopters with a big bite, and they were there on the scene where the convoy had hit an IED and had caused a couple of injuries, and they were there to support. We came in and landed, and our standard operating procedure is to deplane our PJs, and our PJs are Special Forces medics. They're like a Delta Force with medical training, because our core mission is combat search and rescue, so we have to be able to go in over enemy lines and pick up like a pilot that's punched out, so a lot of times the people who we're trying to go in and get are injured. But we were being used for the medevac mission because the Army had a lot to handle in Afghanistan at the time. So when we landed, our standard operating procedure is to immediately deplane our PJs and then take off. So it's a really quick kind of landing, because if we stay in the zone, we're too loud, we're kicking up a lot of dirt and dust, and they can't go out and talk to people about vital statistics and stuff about the patients. So we landed, and in that split second before we took off, I actually heard the sound of like a crack of a bat. It was like, and I saw this windshield in front of me spider. And I was an aircraft maintenance officer before I was a pilot, the 5 years that I was trying to become a pilot. And I was out on the line the night before with the guys trying to replace the windshield. And so it was a brand new windshield. And my first thought was, oh crap, we kicked a rock into the windshield and now the maintenance guys are gonna kill me. But then I felt like a warm feeling on my arm and my leg. And I turned and looked at my aircraft commander who was sitting next to me, and he was like kind of in shock, and he was talking, but I couldn't like hear the words that were coming out of his mouth. And I looked down at myself and just try to imagine the situation. We're flying doors off, so there's nothing in between me and like the ground and the convoy and everything. And I look down and I see that I'm covered in blood. And you can imagine the horror at looking down and realizing that you don't actually bleed burnt orange like you've said you have all your life. It was more of like an OU color. It was awful. It was horrifying. It really was awful. Oklahoma University. You all look very nervous. Spoiler alert, I turn out okay. I'm okay. I get out of it okay. And so that you can picture them, I just want to introduce you to my crew. So the guy in the upper left-hand corner is not part of the story. He was on the other aircraft. But the guy kneeling in front is an Oregon native and like a brother to me. He has a place at my holiday table every year, despite him insulting the instant mashed potatoes and demanding real mashed potatoes. And then that's me with the smirk on my face because I'm heavily armed, and I'm always smirking when I'm heavily armed. I can't help it. And then next to me is TJ. He's my gunner. From the U.S. Virgin Islands, very laid-back kind of guy. Next to him is Aaron. He is a PJ. He is the Special Forces guy. He was the Special Forces team lead that day. And then next to him is my very laid-back aircraft commander, George, Hawaiian, would fly in flip-flops if we would let him. Great guy. So that's who I turned and looked at, who was looking at me horrified. So that's George. So as soon as we landed, I got shot. Luckily, the bullet that came through actually fragmented in a lot of pieces, so I got some in my leg, some in my arm, but not what you would consider like a Hollywood gunshot wound. But there was a lot of blood, and I had to ensure that my crew knew that I could continue flying. So as soon as we took off, I could hear TJ in the back calling and saying, our co-pilot's been hit, we're RTB. RTB is return to base. I already knew that I was perfectly fine. I could tell that I was able to continue on. I could move my hands. I wasn't in shock or anything. I had a warrior spirit, and I'm not going to say it's easy in these kind of situations, but for some of us, we hit the hard part later. So for me, at that time, I was right where I belonged. I was, living my dream, and I wasn't really that, bothered by the sight of the blood and everything. And I called back to him. I was like, hey, gunner, belay that. We're fine to press on. We've got 3 urgent Americans down there and our PJs. I'm fine to continue. Now, everything in the aircraft is double. So we have redundancy. We have 2 fuel systems. Those fuel systems each feed a different engine. So we have 2 engines. So if we lose an engine, we're single engine. We have 2 hydraulic systems. We have 2 pilots. That way, if you lose one, the aircraft can continue. But if you lose one, you can't continue operating, because what would happen to the rest of the crew if we lost both pilots? So I was able to very quickly say, hey guys, I'm fine. I'm making a fist. I can take the controls. Give me the controls. We take turns flying. And when one of us is on the controls, we're outside the aircraft. And when you're not on the controls, you're inside the aircraft looking at the systems and navigating and that type of thing. So I was able to demonstrate to my crew that I was fine, and very quickly, because I had been held to the same standard my whole career, not every career field does that, because I had been through the same exact training as them, and because I had flown with them for years and been integrated in a way that I was part of the team and not separate, there wasn't really a discussion to be had. I said I was fine, and they said, roger that, she's fine, let's move on. So we moved on. We went back in to pick up our patients and our PJs. Unbeknownst to us, the enemy had set up what they call a SAR trap. So they hurt somebody on purpose to lure a medevac bird there in order to try to down the helicopter. There were 150 enemy fighters on the ground that day, waiting for us to land. So when we landed the second time, they knew where we were going to land, and they had repositioned a heavy belt-fed machine gun. So now instead of firing a rifle, it's a crew-served weapon, and it was a much bigger deal. Started lighting us up from the tail to the nose, but very slowly, because those things aren't very maneuverable. And the aircraft was rocking like a little tugboat, a little bit. And the first thing we lost was control of our horizontal stabilizer in the back that keeps the aircraft from pitching over. And when you lose that, it's such a critical system that you hear a horn over the intercom. Because in the 80s, there were a lot of Blackhawks that crashed because they would fly too close to a radio tower and they would lose the horizontal stabilizer and it would crash. So the horn's going off in the intercom now, so we can't talk to each other. And my aircraft commander, who was brand new in country, by the way, I had had the most combat hours in our community, and he was a new guy. So he was the senior pilot, but I had the experience, so they paired us together. His instinct would be to get us out of there. He's feeling the motion of the aircraft, but I was sitting there going like this to him, like, keep the aircraft on the ground, because I was watching the patients being loaded into the aircraft. And had he taken off while the patients were being loaded, he would have hurt or killed somebody. So I was going like this, and he was staying on the ground, to his credit. And then as soon as the last person left the aircraft, I went like this, and he took off. The flight engineer in the back, Steve, says, we're barely clearing the terrain with our extra weight and the fact that we have lost so many systems. We lost our hydraulic system, so it was kind of like driving an 18-wheeler with no power steering. The aircraft is hobbling out, and Steve says, we've got fuel back here. So I immediately looked to the fuel gauges. Now, as an aircraft maintenance officer, I was trained in systems, but I was also trained in mishap investigation. So I know how to analyze a crash site and find what was causal. And when I looked at those fuel gauges, the first one was completely empty already. Not ticking down, completely empty. And I already thought that we were going to crash. There was no way we were going to be able to maintain a single engine. We were barely able to maintain dual engine. And we were about to flame out. So I threw the fuel selector into crossfeed, which means that the 2 fuel systems that feed the 2 engines, now both engines are being fed by one fuel system. But I really only did that so that the mishap investigators would analyze the crash site and not find me causal. And they could say, at least the co-pilot got the fuel selector in the right place. But to my amazement, we were still flying. I must have looked at it the split second that the fuel gauge went empty. But now we've got the number 2, and that one's leaking and probably pushing fuel into a leaky fuel line somehow. Somehow the aircraft was still flying, but it wouldn't be for long. So I told my aircraft commander, hey, we need to land. And he was like, yeah, Roger, we're RTB. Like, you're not talking me into going there again. I already did that once. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, he was outside the aircraft because he was flying. And I said, we have to land over there, or we are going to crash over there. And so he looked down and saw what I was talking about. And he was like, roger that. And there was kind of a seriousness that overtook us, where we're normally on the radios doing things. We all just kind of got quiet because we understood that we were about to land in enemy territory with a huge contingent of enemy fighters, with no perimeter, no help. It was not ideal. I'm the queen of understatement. And so we had kind of a crash land because we were hydraulics off, and climbed out of the aircraft. I stepped around the wheel, backing up, to the cargo area of the aircraft because I had body armor on and I knew my patients didn't. We were taking fire from my side of the aircraft, so I turned my body armor plates to what I thought was the biggest threat, and held my rifle waiting for a point of origin. You can't just kind of spray fire where you think it's coming. You can hurt civilians or friendlies that way. So you have to have a point of origin. You have to see a muzzle flash. You have to see the enemy if you're going to return fire, and you have to know what's behind him. There's all these rules about whether or not you can pull the trigger. So that day, we were defending that aircraft and that perimeter and our patients for about 20 minutes, and nobody had fired a single shot. The aircraft above us were. The Kiowas were beautiful, dropping rockets, and it was like a movie. I mean, the dust on the ground popping up, and it was a little surreal. And I was shoulder to shoulder with the PJ team lead, Aaron, that you saw there. And I was watching my quadrant. He saw what I was doing, protecting the patients, and he nodded, yeah, you keep doing that, but you watch this quadrant, I'll watch this quadrant. And later, when we started talking about women in combat, I was able to be the example of someone who had been shoulder to shoulder with Special Forces, literally, and that he trusted me to watch that quadrant. He wasn't watching my quadrant. We were doing our own thing, but we were part of a team. And we were that team because we had flown together for years and trained together and deployed together. So he determined, because in that situation, rank doesn't matter. Whoever's best suited to lead is the person who takes what we call TAC lead, tactical lead. So the Special Forces guys, obviously on the ground, are the ones in charge. And he said, we're taking more fire on this side than they're taking on that side. Let's button up this side of the aircraft and climb inside. So we climbed inside, closed the door, and we had 3 patients back there, 2 of whom were very upset. One was a woman, one was a man. And I kind of was patting their legs, and I was like, hey, look at me, we're gonna be fine. An aircraft was just shot down, a US aircraft was just shot down, everybody in theater just launched to come get us, we're gonna be fine. And my gunner turned to me and said, this is why they shouldn't let women on those convoys. And I'm heavily armed, covered in blood and fuel, because it's all spewing into the cabin. And I was like, are you effing kidding me? Say that again. And he was like, oh, well, not you. You're great. I'm talking about, But it was a great example of when you're in a job where you're bucking the stereotype and you're doing well, you're an exception. We had men that day who weren't doing well that I didn't go into in the story, like our sister ship. Why were we on the ground for 20 minutes? They should have landed next to us. There was a lot of things going on where some people weren't really living up to what they should have been doing, but they were the exception because they were men. And I was the exception to my group because I was doing well. And I carried that lesson with me. When I went into healthcare, it's not just a women thing. When I went into healthcare, male nurses were treated the same way. They were treated like if they were really good at their job, they were an exception. So when you find yourself doing that, don't let yourself do that. We can't help our first gut reaction. We do judge people, and I use that term softly, we set expectations for what we expect from someone based on how they're talking and how they're dressed and what they look like. But be open to being wrong. Accept that we all have unconscious bias, accept that it's gonna happen, but immerse yourself in other cultures, genders, areas, to try to help yourself with that unconscious bias. But when it does happen, be open to, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person won't do that. And if they do act the way you expect, don't let that reinforce the stereotype for you. We're all individuals, and we all have strengths and challenges, and I think that you're a stronger leader if you accept that. So at this point, we got the worst radio call in the world, and it was the Kiowa pilot saying, we are bingo, fuel, and ammo. So they're out of gas, out of bullets. They said, we got to go to this FOB, this forward operating base, and refuel and rearm. And we said, roger that. And we started preparing for the onslaught and discussing whether or not we would be taken prisoner or if we would fight to the death. Wasn't the best conversation to be having with people that you consider your brothers. And a couple seconds later, the Kiowa pilot said, "Hey, Pedro, we've got a crazy idea." And we were like, "Yes, whatever it is, we're doing that." They said, "Well, your sister ship won't land, but if we land next to you and show them it's safe, maybe they'll land too. And if we land, we'll take the crew out, and your sister ship can take the patients out." And we were like, "Well, if you can get them to land, that'd be great. Let's try that." So they did. These crazy Army Kiowa pilots landed. So these gorgeous little aircraft landed, and our sister ship landed about a football field away. The PJs were going to get the patients to that aircraft, and the crew ran up to the side of the Kiowa, and if you can picture it, put one foot on the skid, the other foot swings around the mount to the rocket pod. You squeeze the mount with your knees, brace your rifle on top of the rocket pod, and push your back against the fuselage and just hold on. Hold on tight. And so that's what we did. And as we did that, the enemy was emboldened by the fact that we were getting everybody out, and they threw caution to the wind and abandoned their dug-in position. The reason we hadn't seen a point of origin was because it was so well planned that they had a lot of good cover. So they abandoned their dug-in position and started coming out and trying to get to the wreckage and to the crew that was remaining. And I turned and looked at the wreckage and saw Steve, my brother, was supposed to be on the Kiowa, and he had turned back and run back to the wreckage because he saw the PJs struggling with a litter patient because the aircraft had, landed a football field away. So he was helping with the patients, and they started running through a hail of fire 100 yards. Try running sometime with a litter patient 100 yards. And I started seeing a point of origin, and I started seeing the enemy abandoning their dug-in position. I felt my aircraft starting to get light, which means they're starting to pull in power. You can feel the skids kind of bouncing. And I started returning fire to the enemy that I saw encroaching on the crash site. Partly because I was angry, because they were trying to hurt people I loved and who were just trying to save people's lives, but also to try to get their attention on, hey, the enemy's coming from over here. This aircraft took off. I had to stop firing because I was cognizant as a pilot of the fact that there was another Kiowa who could have come around the side. And if you don't have radio contact, you can't be just firing your weapon. So I had to stop firing. It was the hardest thing. And I just held on tight as the aircraft went back to Frontenac to rearm and refuel and head back out to the convoy. It was a long 10 minutes not knowing what happened back there. And as we landed at Frontenac, one of my regrets is that I didn't stop and thank the pilots, but I had the single thought of, I have to go find out if Steve's okay, and if he's not, which vehicle am I going to steal? And I was walking toward our tactical operations center. You can always find the TOC by where the flags are. So I saw this one building had a bunch of satellite radio antennas and flags, and I was walking, with a purpose toward the TOC. And this young Army private runs up to me, must have gotten a radio call ahead of time, runs up to me and stands in front of me, but sees that I'm about to barrel over him, so he starts running backwards. And he must have gotten a radio call about an injured pilot coming in. And if you can picture it, I had taken my flight suit and tied it around my waist, like the sleeves, and I had body armor on, and I had a helmet on with a visor down, because obviously I was just in the wind getting beaten up, and I was armed in gloves and all this. I had about 7 knives on me. You could only see 5, though. And I'm walking, and he's going, sir, I need you to stop. And I'm like, out of my way. And he's like, yes, sir, I understand, but I've got to check out your wounds. I've been ordered to check out your injuries. And I said, as I'm walking, and he's walking backwards, I'm like, my arm's fine. I've stopped bleeding. Everything's fine. And he's like, yes, sir, but I've got to check out your leg, because he can see this pool of blood on my leg. And I could see that he wasn't going to get out of my way. TJ, being protective of the fact that he later told me he felt like, because he's the one who sits behind me and he's on the left side of the aircraft with me, that he felt like it was partly his fault that I got shot because he's the gunner. And so I didn't know it at the time, but he was feeling very protective and kind of right on my shoulder. So as I stopped, he kind of bumped my shoulder. I stopped and looked at the guy and took down my pants. And I'm just like, see, my leg's fine. And I looked around, and it was like somebody had taken a needle off a record. There was just like, and I looked down, and I realized I was wearing Hello Kitty underwear. I'm trying to be Rambo, and she's like, Tuesday. But I owned it, you know? I was never trying to be one of the guys. I was always the kind of pilot that owned my feminine strength and capitalized on the things that I was strong in. I was a mix, we all are, of the feminine and the masculine, and I just never let go of that. I didn't try to be one of the guys. I didn't let go of my femininity, and I think that was a strength. TJ behind me is like, what the F are you looking at? Bowing up at everybody, and everyone kind of found what they were doing before, and, you know. Got to the talk, found out that everybody made it out okay. It's like a total miracle. Existential crisis later, that's a different speech though, of how in the heck did we all make it out? How did I catch the fuel selector before it crashed? How was it that I was the only one hit? It was insane. But we all made it. And the fact that I found myself in this extraordinary ground combat situation later led the ACLU to call me. Because I was a little bit of a dog and pony show for the Guard. At the time, we were California Air National Guard when Schwarzenegger was governor. So, you know, as I ran out to the Kiowa, I'm like, get to the chopper, you know. And so when I got home, I was a little bit of a dog and pony show. That's okay, though, with the medals and everything. And the ACLU got wind of the story and called and said, did you know that the ground combat exclusion policy is unconstitutional? Would you like to join our suit and sue the Secretary of Defense? And I was like, click. And they called back and said, you know, you're a shining example of what women can do in combat. You have a responsibility to go and talk to the military leaders about your experience. And I was like, well, military leaders are very well aware of my experience, but the civilians that were in charge of the military maybe not. And Secretary Panetta was a good Secretary of Defense. And I felt strongly that he wanted to repeal that policy. He had made statements to that effect. But he's out there on his own with very little, you know, he has to spend like all his political capital to do something as severe as that. So in the hopes of trying to give him as much like excuse as possible to do it, I agreed to join the lawsuit to give him, you know, to give us a chance to get some talking points out there and inform the national conversation about what was actually happening. The ground combat exclusion policy was not keeping women out of combat. It was that women couldn't be assigned to a unit whose primary mission was ground combat. But we had women in combat everywhere, not just accidentally either. We had female engagement teams in the Marines who would go in and kick in doors with special forces because men couldn't pat down the women in this culture. And we needed women to be able to either take into custody or pat down and make sure they weren't wearing explosives or anything like that. And we had really badass women. The two that are over my shoulder in this picture are two Marine female engagement team leaders. You wouldn't think it. The blonde is one of the smartest people I've ever met. After this case, she went to Harvard. She's a linguist. She knows 9 languages, and she's tough as nails. If you want a good laugh, you should Google. It's a Samantha Bee piece where she actually, at the end of the piece, it's about women in combat, picks up Samantha Bee and carries her like officer and a gentleman. It's really funny. So she's great, you know, and we have these women out there doing these things, but because of the policy, the commanders in the field who needed women in these jobs were having to find loopholes. They would rotate them in and out 45 days, and then they would attach them to different units. These things have serious consequences on unit cohesion, you know? And if you take my circumstance, if I had been just thrown into that crew and they didn't have any idea of my training and we didn't spend years flying together and they were unaware of my abilities, when you're in combat with someone, and I would say high pressure situations at home as well, you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of the person who is standing beside you. You have to be able to anticipate them. You have to be able to know what weakness you need to make up for, or what strength you can turn away and rely on them for. And that was lost because of the ground combat exclusion policy. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously recommended that he repeal the policy, and he did. And we thought that that was a huge victory, but then Jeff Sessions said he was going to legislate that back in place. So I co-founded the Combat Integration Initiative, and was a fancy word for a bunch of really pissed off female combat vets. Not a group you want to piss off. And we basically stormed the Hill, and for 4 years we were talking to congressmen and women, senators, Senate and House Armed Services Committee and their staffers. Their staffers are really the ones that move the world when it comes to legislation. Forging relationships, basically just a giant change management operation. And after seeing some of the civil liberties in this country get dismantled, I no longer say we've won anything. I always say we've gained ground and we're going to have to defend it, and we're going to have to defend civil liberties forever. Never get complacent, always stand up and demand, never think because of a decision or an action or an executive order that we've won something. We must continue to protect the progress we've made in this country. And you have to protect the progress you've made in your city, and you have to not be afraid to take on insurmountable things. And if you had looked at the ground combat exclusion policy and seen how bad it was for the military and wanted to do something about it, if you can't stand up and sue the Secretary of Defense, because honestly, when I was a second lieutenant, I couldn't have done it. I didn't have the credibility. I was sexually assaulted in the military. All of the bad things that happened to me in the military, which a lot of good happened too, made me the perfect plaintiff. And it made it hard for people to throw stones at me. And you know, it made it. I was a credible voice on things like sexual assault because I had experienced them. But if you're not that person, you can still make that change happen. You know, the ACLU saw this happening, and they knew that they didn't have a lot of credibility in influencing conservative institutions. So they found me and the women that I took part in this suit with. And that's so critical, is if you're not the one who can be the face of the change, you have to go and seek that person out and motivate them and give them what they need. And I think that that's more often the way that things happen. But that's how one person can influence change. And I know that teamwork is important, but that's a lot of one people coming together, you know? But don't think, you know, because you can't recruit a team or something like that, that you can't do anything. There's a lot that you can do on your own and by yourself. And coming to conferences like this shows me that you know that and that you're ready to take on that challenge. So whatever thought is in your mind right now that, I don't know, I'd love to hear how she would tackle that, that's the thing you got to go home and do. I would challenge you to do that. Try and fail 15,000 different things until you find the one that works. I want to tell you, just as a last, it wouldn't be a good presentation without something for you to read. So be the change, and I don't mean, you know, that can mean a lot of things, but I think the most important thing is if you want to change something, you have to be the example first. First of all, because that does, you know, provide a drop in the bucket, but also you have to come at this from a place of credibility. So if you hope that people see you with integrity, you have to like check the mail with integrity. You have to do everything you can with it. You have to be the change that you're hoping to see, okay? Knowing your audience, what's in it for me, is so critical, because if they had approached this from a women's rights perspective, which it also is, it has the benefit of also being the right thing to do, but it was a military effectiveness issue from day one. It was hurting the military. And we're talking to the Pentagon, and if we're talking to them about women's rights, they're gonna be like, I don't care. And they shouldn't be. Their mission is war fighting, not culture change. So I had to know to direct my message to them on military effectiveness. So know your audience is what's in it for me when you're trying to impact change. Have empathy. Don't look at people as your enemies. Even people who are holding thoughts and beliefs that you find morally reprehensible. There was a time when people thought racial integration was morally reprehensible. Get past this he said, she said, or this us and them and throwing stones, and try to come at it from a place of empathy. I had to do this because I'm so transparent that you can read everything on my face. So if I took a question from someone and I thought, well, you just hate women, you could see that all over my face, and it didn't make me very effective. So instead of training me on how to change that expression, I had to train myself on how to come at it from a different perspective. So people who would yell at me, I got death threats, but I had to understand they thought they were doing what was best for this country. We have the same goal in mind, to have a strong military and an effective military. You know, and they wanted to protect their daughters. I get that. You got to come at it from that perspective. And finally, because I have all of your attention, I'm going to tell you, you have to hang on to your why. I was chased down the street in Washington, D.C. once in an evening gown and heels by an ambassador yelling at me that women shouldn't be in combat. And in moments like that, I'm like, why am I doing this? Oh yeah, this is my why. A mom with young kids who has everyone's attention is going to show a picture of her baby. I just figured out a way to put it in. So hold on to your why. That's all I've got for you guys, but I really hope you have some really good questions. I want you to let them rip. Anything that you think, oh, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if this applause is for the whiskey, but thank you. I'm going to put this right here. Thank you so much. I'm going to give this the highest compliment. I'm going to check my bag at the airport just so I can take this home. I think we have time for maybe 3 questions. 10 minutes, okay. There's a question back here in the back. Does somebody have, we have mic runners, right? There's 2 I see. I can hear you. Go for it. Awesome.
The question part is, can you tell us a little bit about the obstacles you faced on the front end, trying to get that for yourself on the recruiting and early training?
So obstacles to becoming a pilot? Is that what you mean, sir? Yeah. Okay. So the question, first of all, thank you for your daughter's service. She's just signed her papers, so that's very exciting. And I do feel a giant responsibility to the men and women coming behind me that we give them a military and a national security, environment where they can effectively do their jobs. So thank you for that. And the question is, can I elaborate a little bit more on some of the obstacles that I faced at pilot training? When I mentor young women like your daughter, I always tell them if there's only one thing they ever remember, it's that you should not see discrimination first. If you're being discriminated against, I never thought I was being discriminated against. And I think half the time I was right. Half the time I just wasn't good enough. I needed to work harder. Sometimes I was being discriminated against. And it wouldn't be until it was so blatant and pushed in my face that I couldn't deny it that I would finally say, okay, yes, that's discrimination. The 2 that come to mind are when I was in Japan. I was a maintenance officer. I was working on the F-16. And my first marriage, I was married for 4 years. He was physically abusive to me in the first year, and I told him it was over. I stayed married to him because he went to pilot training, and he was also a friend of mine, and I was trying to support him, but we weren't, for all intents and purposes, married. But on paperwork, he said, I gave him the choice. Do you want a divorce before pilot training and go through that stress, or I'll support you through pilot training? He chose the end of pilot training, but that was my personal business, and that wasn't anyone else's business. And my second year in my marriage, after my marriage was already over, the operations group commander at the time said, I understand that you're the number 1 person on the base, but I know that your husband's going to be a pilot. And families with 2 pilots don't work, and it's not fair to the kids, and who's going to support him and take care of the kids? What's worse than him saying that is that he felt safe saying that to me, full board colonel. What does that tell you about the environment and the culture? And I was shocked, He came running up to me later. In full gear, he was about to go fly. He was an F-16 pilot, and that doesn't happen for people who know in that culture. When they put their gear on, they're not the operations group commander anymore. They're not a full-board colonel. They're a pilot. You stay out of their way. They've got the mission on the mind. He stopped on the way to the aircraft to come back to my office and say, I don't know what I was thinking. Of course you have my number 1, recommendation. But of course, what else did he do behind the scenes to hurt that? I don't know. So that's an example. The I would argue the worst example is when I was in pilot training, and I was at the top of my class unless I was flying with this one guy. This one guy kept failing me for objective things or subjective things like situational awareness or judgment. Like you could be, hold your hover within 10 feet, hold your airspeed within 5 knots, hold your whatever within this, get to your time on target within 15 seconds. Those things you were graded on very obviously, but then there were these other things, judgment, situational awareness, and he always failed me. And I would always go to him and say, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And he's like, I just don't think you got what it takes. And I would be like, God, I don't have what it takes. Like, what can I do? And I would work on it, and I would work with mentors, and I would just work and work and work. And I finally went to the DO, and I said, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I didn't go to the DO and say, this guy hates women. Because I took that attitude, he called the instructor in and said, what's she doing wrong? And he was like, in the Bible, it says, and I was like, oh, God, here it comes. And he just didn't think that I was subservient enough and didn't think women should be in combat and women should be pilots. Also felt safe saying that. And he should feel safe saying that because nothing happened to him. He was just told he couldn't fly with women anymore. He was still an instructor. He could have completely ended my career, and how many women's careers have been ended that way with men who haven't, or people, it doesn't have to be men. A lot of women discriminated against women. People who haven't come out and talked about it. That's why I do what I do, because we have to talk about it, because some of these things are so horrible that we're like, that doesn't really happen, right? But I'll tell you why my advice is don't ever see discrimination, and it's because it made me a better pilot. I was #1 on the base. I worked my tail off to get there. I didn't squander the opportunity because I really appreciated it. And I was the best pilot I could be because of that, because I was constantly trying to be the example that proved them wrong. So those are my examples. Probably have time for one more. One more question. There was a hand back here. I don't know if, yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. No, that's okay. It always surprised me. Always be surprised by it, even to the end, even to this day. I'm doing some things that I can't talk about from the stage in a space that is male-dominated, and I faced a giant amount of discrimination from another woman who said, "What kind of mom are you doing this when you've got small kids?" And I was like, well, I'm the kind of mom that I was before I did this. I'm a great mom, and I have a great family support network, and I know I'm going to be busy, but there's good moms that work, and there's good moms that stay at home, you know? So always be surprised by it, but always prepare for it. That doesn't mean you let people pull the rug out from under you, you know? So I would maintain that that the best answer to it is to just be the best at what you're doing, and then when they say that to you, they're embarrassed. I had a gunner that said, my first gunner, actually, when I was a brand new pilot, said he didn't want to fly with me. He did, but he didn't want to fly with me because he didn't think women should fly because, quote, he did not think I would hold my own in an evasion scenario, like the one we just talked about. I haven't heard from him since that happened, strangely. And I said, I analyzed the situation, and I said, yes, this is a discrimination. And he was like a 60-year-old old Irish New York City cop with a big tire, you know. And I was like, so I immediately dropped down into front lane arrest, and I was like, let's go. Push-up contest. And I'm half kidding, but I was serious too. And all the guys were like, ooh, she's challenging Mac to a push-up contest. And he was like, yeah, I don't have time for this. And he walked away. So be surprised by it, but be prepared for it. And had he said, all right, let's push, and I had only been able to do 10, that would have been really embarrassing. I did that because I knew I could push 100, you know, and then some. So always just, you know, return it with strength. Or return it with the antithesis of whatever they're saying. If they're saying, you know, men can't be nurses because they're not nurturing enough, men should return that with nurturing. You know what I mean? So return it with whatever you know is in your heart. Follow your heart. I have a TED Talk that I do where I talk about, all the people who tried to stop me along the way. I wrote a book about this called Shoot Like a Girl. And at the very end of the acknowledgments, I said, and to all the people who ever tried to stop me, thank you so much for motivating me and motivating me to keep going. And by the way, nanny, nanny, boo, boo. Thank you guys so much for the warm welcome, for bringing me to your beautiful state, for getting me drunk. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, I learned another person never to follow to a microphone beside kids and dogs. Oh, but I want to thank you for your thoughts and insight into the importance of teamwork and fighting for what you believe in. More importantly, of a moral compass that never is deviated. We are all put in positions that challenge us, and we can use your lessons and insight that you were kind enough to share with us to think about how we can be better leaders and embody the change that we seek for our communities. There are things that are translatable and transferable, and just bless you for that. And by the way, do check the luggage, because that's good stuff. All righty. Our next round of sessions begins at 10:45. It's about 15 minutes from here. There are outstanding sessions planned for the remainder of the conference, including one on building healthy cities and multiple sessions on housing solutions, as there were yesterday. We hope that you find these sessions valuable and current and helpful. Also, don't forget to stop by and visit with the state agency directors today and with the representatives of our congressional delegations. These partner agencies and offices are here at the League Conference to provide resources for cities that you might not know about. And they're all here together in one place, so please don't forget to stop by and see them. Make their day. Almost done. We also invite you to this year's trade show in the exhibit hall, located just across the breezeway from the main entrance of the hotel. We have 60 vendors with us this year offering products and services that can benefit your city. Lunch will be provided at the trade show today at noon. So thank you for your attention. What an audience. Packed house. You can't beat it. Bless you all. Have a good conference.